On Wednesday, June 10th, 2015, Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, and Pope Francis I, the heads of two world superpowers, met in the Vatican to discuss the most sensitive and political conflicts that are affecting the world in our time. This was in the same week that Russia was snubbed and threatened with more sanctions at the G7 summit meeting in Germany. Russia is to host the 2018 World Cup, and if anyone is familiar with football, which others call soccer, it is the most loved and watched sport in the entire world, and the Vatican, as shown in previous studies, has taken advantage of its popularity to boost her own profile and morale on the world stage. But with something of this nature with such a global mass appeal, powerful players try to manipulate it, and many suspect that the recent scandals in FIFA, which does exist, is really an attack on Russia to lose its staging of that popular sport. But when Putin and the Pope met, one of the key discussions was the Ukraine. Russia has been blamed for the conflict in the Ukraine, where nearly every media outlet in the West has blamed her for the conflict. But as shown in a previous study, which even Adores will quote from again, the West is to blame, not Russia. According to the prevailing wisdom in the West, the Ukraine crisis can be blamed almost entirely on Russian aggression. But this account is wrong. The United States and its European allies share most of the responsibility for the crisis. Pope Francis I is fully aware of this, but skillfully taking advantage of the mood of our times, he tells Vladimir Putin to create peace so that he, Pope Francis I, can come out on top as the world's peacemaker, a very cleverly crafted method. Time magazine confirmed this with these words from a contributor. He said, "I still think Pope Francis is the best politician in the world." In June 2014, Francis convened an unprecedented meeting between then Israeli President Shimon Peres and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to discuss a new forward between the warring nations. And last December, Francis helped usher in a new era of peace and dialogue between the US and Cuba. If Francis can help make progress with Putin in resolving the crisis in Ukraine, the Pope will have achieved a diplomatic triple crown. And then all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him and see him as the global peacemaker. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, is seen as keeping countries in debt with austerities with an ever so tight stranglehold on vulnerable nations, one of them being Greece, where there is high unemployment and frustration that leads to rioting. And according to the London Guardian newspaper, dated to Friday the 5th of June 2015, Athens refuses to pay the €300 million bill that is due. And the head of the European-based IMF, Christine Lagarde, and the head of the World Bank, Jim Yong Kim, talk about poverty at the Council of Foreign Relations, when they are the ones that are perpetuating the cycle. But the Pope meets with the heads of these bodies and is seen as the voice that speaks on behalf of the downtrodden. Cannot anybody see what her ultimate goal is? To find intellectuals in our time skilled in this area is extremely rare. So we have to go back 2 centuries to a book published in the 19th century titled Which Sovereign, Queen Victoria or the Pope, written by the Protestant historian, the Scotsman, James Aitken Wiley. The Church of Rome's main ambition is political power. Rome is not a church but a temporal monarchy of the purest despotic type. What Rome calls a church is what other men call a government. The proof is not far to seek. The difficulty lies in getting men to admit the evidence of incontrovertible facts and weigh calmly the forces of fair argument. There is a blinding and bewildering influence going along with all matters appertaining to Rome, which prevents men perceiving the real character of her system, and disposes them to excuse in her what they would sternly condemn and promptly forbid if it were attempted by any other class of men. The Pope then, by the very essence of his office, is a temporal king, and the papacy a temporal kingdom. He has, like other kings, a palace and a court. He has a territory and subjects who have the enviable felicity of being governed exclusively by canon law, and he has an army and a fleet. It is true that these last he was stripped of in 1870, but the loss of his beggared acre has not much crippled his temporal power. When the Gothic kings with their peoples entered the pale of the Roman Church, they recognized the Pope as a common father. They carried their disputes to his feet, and step by step he advanced to dominancy. He was first their counselor, next their arbiter, and in the 13th century and onwards, their master and lord. History incontestably shows that from the time that the popes became temporal lords of Europe, onward to the 17th century, almost all the wars of the Western world were occasioned by the ambitions and intrigues of the papacy. And it is curious to mark that now it is the papacy that is proposed to be called in as the world's peacemaker. And this was 2 centuries ago. All that dwell upon the earth shall worship him according to the prophecy. And with the papacy looked on as the world's peacemaker, the groundwork is being laid for that historic meeting in the United States in September 2015, where we will patiently await to see the outcome.